Hello and welcome everyone to the 22nd webinar in Contact's Produce Safety webinar series. You may have noticed that I am not Larsen, and you'd be right. I'm Alexis Hamilton. I'm an assistant professor and extension specialist at Virginia Tech, and I'm typically behind the scenes on putting the Produce Safety webinar series together. But today I get to be front and center with you all, so I'm very excited about it and grateful to be here with you all today. As you also know, this third season of this webinar series continues to tackle fresh produce safety topics through a dynamic webinar series that brings together industry, academic, and regulatory minds to solve some of the produce industry's most timely challenges. This series is part of a larger industry outreach and risk mitigation project called CONTACT, or Scientific Challenges and Cost-Effective Management of Risks Associated with Implementation of Produce Safety Regulations. This project is supported by a specialty crops research initiative from the USDA, National Institute of Food and Agriculture. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations that are expressed in this presentation are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the view of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Who is CONTACT, you might be wondering, particularly if this is your first produce safety webinar. It's many universities and government institutions that ultimately make up the CONTACT team, and this is composed of more than 50 faculty, staff, students, and volunteers, not to mention the support of our Produce Advisory Committee, or our PAC, whose affiliations you can see on the right side of the slide. It definitely takes a village to make this work, and you're all a part of it. We're very appreciative of each individual's support and your ongoing efforts to make CONTACT a grant that is championed by all of you. This year, we've begun each webinar with an update about one of CONTACT's 7 research or outreach objectives. And this month, we're talking about Objective 7, which is our education and outreach objective. One of the things it focuses on is developing new educational content to support some existing knowledge needs across the industry. So we put together a 5-hour beginner's course all about foundations and environmental monitoring. The course is broken up into 3 different modules that address what an EMP is, how it can help identify and verify control of food safety risks, and the prerequisite programs that need to be in place before you start implementing that program. It's entirely online, and you can take it at your own pace as you develop your own program. You can register for it using the QR code on the slide. You can do that by hovering your phone with the camera on over that QR code, and a link should pop up or drop down for you to click on. You could also, if you want, go to the resource page on the CONTACT website and click on the training tab. Be sure as well to check out the CONTACT website and YouTube page for more produce safety resources beyond just the training piece. This is things like our objective updates, all of our key takeaway documents from this webinar series, the recordings, and there's so much more if you visit. You can also subscribe to our YouTube page so you can get instant notifications anytime we drop new content, like when we dropped our mini webinars. Before I introduce our speakers, a quick reminder for today. If you want to submit a question for them to answer, either while they're presenting or during that Q&A session at the end, please remember to submit them through the Q&A box and not the chat box. Now, if you'll also please help me welcome our 2 speakers today from New Era Partners. We've got Natalie Hunter and Erik Larsen. Natalie brings a wealth of experience in sustainable supply chain, traceability technology, and business development. Most recently, she held a leadership role in innovation at the Marine Stewardship Council, which is a UN-recognized leader in sustainable fishing standard certification. At New Era Partners, Natalie will work with New Era's clients to leverage traceability technology to improve supply chain operations by increasing efficiency and transparency across their supply chain. Erik is a veteran in the agriculture industry, starting his ag career in 1994. Since then, he has led the IT departments for such well-known companies as Nature Farms, L&M Companies, and others. He's very familiar with the critical role the IT department plays in technology implementations and is an active member of PSO.org, which is a consortium of IT leaders in the fresh produce industry. Erik maintains his IT leadership role at New Era Partners, bringing his expertise in technology and its role in the agriculture industry to their clients' organizations during this critical time in food traceability compliance. So Natalie, Erik, welcome. We're so happy to have you. I'm going to turn the webinar over to you.
Excellent. Alexis, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And to all of you here today, thank you so much for attending. To Contact, thank you for having us. What a great and important and helpful initiative. I actually spent quite a bit of time looking through a number of your resources and that YouTube channel, just excellent stuff. So thank you. Thank you so much for having us. Today, we're here to talk to you all about FDA FSMA 204. Now, I'm assuming that there will be various levels of understanding and familiarity with the regulation here today. So for some of you, you might know some of what we're going to go over. And for those of you, hopefully you'll be learning, those other of you, hopefully you will be learning something new. What we want to be able to specifically bring to this webinar and this conversation today are insights into not only the regulation and what's expected of you and your supply chain partners, but also of the why behind the rule. So trying to lend a little bit more of our traceability expertise into this. And then, of course, to be able to open up for a wide Q&A section so that if you have any specific questions that you're concerned about, that we would be able to help you out with those today. So the way that we will run this is that we will go through the content in advance, and then we'll open it up into a Q&A session at the end. But we will look forward to seeing what questions come up in that question and answer box that you see at the bottom of your screen. So on that note, Alexis, if you can move us forward, please. So today, as I said, we're talking about FDA FSMA 204. It is actually currently in effect. So there is a lot of focus on this January 20th, 2026 date. But let's all be clear. We are currently, or the regulation is actually currently in effect. It was put into effect in November 15th of 2022. What we're in is a grace period that the FDA is allowing the industry to familiarize themselves with the rule and to get their systems and processes updated in order to enable compliance with the rule. We have just 20 months left of that 4+ year grace period, or about 4-year grace period, in order for everybody to be compliant. But who are we? Alexis gave us a little bit. Next slide, please, Alexis. She gave us a little bit of a background information, so I won't bore you with everything. But what I do want to point out is that we at New Era Partners, we are a boutique consulting firm. We're focused predominantly on helping food industry businesses find their way and support them on their journey to compliance with FSMA 204. But as a group, we are experts in all things traceability, not only traceability processes and systems, but also traceability technology. The founder of our consultancy actually is a former FDA Office of Food Policy and Response consultant, and him and his team actually co-authored the FSMA 204 rule. So Erik and I are in very good hands under his leadership. Andrew Kennedy is his name. He is also the previous head of the Institute of Food Technologists and their Global Food Traceability Center. He is a co-chair of the technology working group for the Produce Traceability Initiative, who I am an initiative that I'm sure most people on this call are familiar with. And like myself, he has also been integral to the development of a standardization of data and interoperability standard for the seafood industry called the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability. Andrew is an incredibly knowledgeable individual. As a team, what we hope to provide our clients is that support from all things from understanding their supply chains, doing those gap analysis to understand where businesses are complying to the regulation or not, and also helping them develop innovations and implement technology solutions in order to achieve compliance, but also for FSMA and beyond to find a way to get those technology investments in that data that's being collected to actually go to work so that there's positive ROI on those investments. So that's who we are as New Era partners. So I hope that you'll trust our insight into FSMA 204. Next slide, thank you. So what we'll start to do is just with an overview. But I think what is important from my experience is that a lot of individuals and organizations have assumptions about what traceability itself is when you talk about traceability. Many of you are academics on this call. You will be familiar with the fact that there are a multitude of definitions for what traceability is. I decided to pull this one from the International Fresh Produce Association when we're talking about traceability insofar as it pertains to FSMA 204. So traceability is a business process that enables trading partners to follow products forward and backward through the supply chain. Traceability itself can be very general or it can be very granular and detailed. Traceability can cross both full supply chains, so from harvest to consumer, or partial supply chains. It just depends on what the actors involved in traceability need it to do. Alexis noted the takeaways. If there's one takeaway that I think I would love people who have attended this webinar to be able to walk away with is the understanding that traceability, and especially traceability in the way that the FDA is now requiring it, is a team sport. So in order for traceability to be effective, we all need to be in agreement with the level of granularity and the level of detail that we want in that traceability. And effectively, that's what the FSMA 204 rule, that's what the purpose of this food traceability rule is. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about all of these acronyms, I'll continue to provide you with more detailed explanations, but we're talking about the US Food and Drug Administration's Food Safety Modernization Act. So this act is a part of the US Food and Drug Administration's new era of smarter food safety. And specifically, we're talking about the Food Traceability Final Rule, which is Section 204D. So in this rule, the FDA is requiring, and this is the FDA's language, the persons who manufacture, produce, pack, or hold foods on the food traceability list, which we'll talk about, that they need to maintain and provide their supply chain partners with key data elements. And we will detail that for certain critical tracking events, which we'll talk about in a food supply chain. The FDA here is determining with this regulation what traceability is. Let's go back to that thought about there's multitude of definitions about what traceability is, and there's multiple ways to produce something that is traceable, just depending on what the definition around traceability is for the actors in that supply chain or for that business. With this rule, the FDA is creating a standardized language and terminology for how food supply chains look and how they operate, how we want to label those different supply chain nodes, how we want to label the activities that are occurring across the supply chain, and what the FDA's expectation is for good traceability. That's what this rule is all about. It's about getting everybody on the same page and setting a very black and white expectation for what is good and what is unacceptable traceability. Next slide, please. So let's talk about enforcement, because this is something that comes up in every conversation. What can the FDA actually do? So this is their words exactly. So the FDA does have the ability to issue advisory letters, and those can be public advisory letters. They can enact court actions, seizures, injunctions, seizures of products, and they can also detain or control adulterated or misbranded products. They can enforce mandatory recalls of food, and they can also suspend facilities' food registration to prevent the shipment of that food. That latter one, or those latter ones, I should say, those are big deals. Those are things that could have really negative impact on implicated food businesses. One of the insights that I did want to provide you from an FDA agent at a presentation that I attended just about a month ago, they stated that routine inspections will begin in 2027. So the FDA has a motto that they educate while they regulate. And I think that this is what is happening here. The FDA has enacted this regulation. They have provided a grace period for the food industry to be able to understand and make the appropriate changes in order to be in compliance with the new regulation. Enforcement will begin in January of 26, but they are very committed to the educate while they regulate motto. So what my expectation is, and this is solely my expectation, what I felt was implied in this presentation from this FDA agent was that we can expect, likely over the course of January 26 or from January 26 on, their regular normal amount of inspections, and that if there are issues that are not necessarily in compliance with the new rule that the FDA might, my assumption is that there would be some leniency over the course of 2026 for businesses to make appropriate changes and likely send back information to FDA auditors in order to prove that they have made the appropriate changes now. So my assumption based on this statement is that there will be some leniency for compliance in January 26. Now, I just want to qualify again, this is my assumption based off of their statement that they won't really be enacting those routine inspections until 2027. What I can also infer from that statement, however, is that due to the electronic nature of this act or this regulation, that there is every potential that these routine inspections will increase because electronic systems will enable the FDA to have easier access to some oversight, whereas paper-based systems were much longer to fulfill audits in the past. So again, these are the things that I'm inferring from the statements that were made. But what we do know, detailed by the FDA agents, is that those routine inspections will begin in 2027. Next slide, please. So to start to dig a little bit more into what exactly this rule is, there are enhanced record keeping requirements. Records need to be kept for 2 years. The record keeping requirements can be on paper, but likely will be in electronic format for you because of the requirement for an electronic sortable spreadsheet to be made available to those FDA agents within 24 hours of request. I want to make sure everybody is clear on this. Those of you who are familiar with the Bioterrorism Act, so it went into effect in 2002. Compliance was in 2004, I believe. The record keeping requirements of the Bioterrorism Act remain in place. Effectively, FSMA 204 is building additional data specifications around that groundwork that the Bioterrorism Act already put into place. Another element here that is something that I would really encourage anybody who is industry to start thinking about a little bit more is that, yes, this is an FDA rule, so it is a national, a domestic regulation, but the regulation applies to both domestic and foreign entities for any of the food that is found on that FTL list meant for human consumption in the United States. A huge percentage of our food in the United States is imported. All of the requirements of this rule must be applied to that imported food as well. And this is one of the sticky parts of this regulation that is going to be one of those challenging bits for food industry businesses to be able to figure out how they're going to do, because we need to ensure that those foreign supplying partners and foreign supply chain partners are able to collect the information as dictated by this rule and to send it forward in the supply chain. The FDA will have some enforcement oversight on this note, because as most people on this call will be familiar, there is the FDA Foreign Supplier Verification Program. There's FDA registration numbers for any food business that wants to export their food to be imported into the US. So there is the ability for the FDA to apply some enforcement on those businesses. So this is something that I really encourage all food businesses to keep in mind, especially if you have foreign supply chain partners. Next slide, please. So I have talked about the electronic elements of this. So the requirement that the FDA receives upon request an electronic sortable spreadsheet is one of the big changes of this rule. So what they're saying is that you can maintain a paper-based system if that's how you're working, but when we ask for the information, you need to deliver it to us in our standardized format with our standardized language in an electronic sortable spreadsheet. We're going to touch more on what that could look like in a little bit later in this presentation. But we did want to note at this early stage of the presentation that the FDA cannot dictate that software is a requirement here. But from our experience at New Era Partners, and surely for many of you who have either been involved in foodborne illness, food recall situations, traceback situations for auditing, whether you have studied it for your research or whether you've actually been involved in it on a food business side, you know how painful those can be. And the kicker here is that the FDA is stating that they want that electronic sortable spreadsheet within 24 hours. Again, those of you familiar with these sorts of recall or traceback situations or audit situations, you know that it could take days, weeks, months sometimes in order to be able to collect the information that is necessary. It is likely, depending on the scale of your business, that some sort of software solution will be required for your business, will be helpful for your business in order for you to be able to comply with this rule. What I would say on this note, though, is that though from my perspective as somebody who is a big supporter of the power of efficiencies that technology can provide for us, it is really helpful for businesses to make sure that they're very clear on what their needs are before you go out spending money and investing in some sort of technology solution. Having some sort of consultant or doing extensive research independently before you make decisions like that would be really helpful. The other thing that I could say here is that before any technology investment is made, is that conversations ought to be had with your supply chain partners. One of the things that the FDA is laying the groundwork for here in this regulation is for there to be common language and common expectations, but there is still some variability in the way that data can be captured and shared across the supply chain. Technology investments, like so many other things, traceability is a team sport. If your technology cannot interoperate, cannot seamlessly integrate with your supply chain partners' technologies, then maybe investment in a different form of technology might be better for your business. We can talk more about that a little bit later, but having those conversations with your supply chain partners and making sure that everybody's clear on what each other's expectations are and how you're going to share data electronically between your businesses is of the utmost importance in order to find a technology solution that is effective for your business and for compliance to this rule. Next slide, please. One of the new things in this regulation is the requirement for a traceability plan to be put in place. These traceability plans effectively are process documents that will prove to an FDA agent that your business has made careful consideration around the traceability requirements in this rule, that your staff is trained and that they know what their role is in the situation of a recall or a traceback or an FDA audit, and that you have procedures and clarity, procedures in place and clarity around how you obtain the records that you have been keeping for 2 years, how you are identifying foods on that FDL, what those traceability lock codes are. Again, we're going to talk more about that in a few minutes, who the point of contact is, so on and so forth. This is a document that really proves that you and your organization understand this rule and you understand how to implement and enact this rule effectively in your business so that you can effectively respond, especially if there's a crisis situation. Ultimately, that is what the FDA is concerned about right now. The point of increasing the traceability requirements here is not necessarily just to create a bureaucratic administrative headache for everybody. It's in order to ensure a safer food supply for all people in America. The FDA wants to make sure that we can do better when it comes to food recalls and decrease the amount of people that are getting sick, decrease the amount of food that gets wasted or lost, and make these sorts of recalls and investigations much more quick and efficient. The only way for them to feel secure that you can do that is that you have a traceability plan in place that's going to be effective. These plans have to be retained for 2 years, similar to the data. But there's also a requirement for you to update those plans whenever changes are put in place. So you'll note that designated point of contact. If somebody leaves their position and somebody new comes in, you got to update that plan with the new point of contact's information. Next slide, please. So the FTL, the Food Traceability List. Again, my assumption is that most of you are familiar with this, but I hope that we can point out a little bit of the why and provide a little bit more detail around this. So the Food Traceability List is a list of the foods that are implicated under this regulation. So not all food is implicated under this regulation, just the foods that are on this Food Traceability List. The FDA developed this list and utilizing a risk-based framework from historical food safety data. And they have made it clear that they will be reviewing this list every 5 years and that it will likely be expanded. I think that's a really important thing for us to note. We can give you a little bit of insight from our consulting practice. What we are hearing from a number of businesses is that the food traceability list is quite extensive, and that rather than have 2 separate processes for record keeping and tracking all of the product that's coming in and all the product that's going out, most businesses are deciding to just follow follow what is required in this rule insofar as record keeping and coding of the product for all foods. I think that's something that I would really encourage all food businesses to take into consideration. It might work for your business, it might not. But it could create some efficiencies and decrease complexity especially for the people on the floor of your business who actually have to be doing that data capture and record keeping at all times. Next slide, please. So the food traceability list, again, my assumption is that most of you will be pretty familiar with this food traceability list. It's been talked about a lot, but there's one thing that I feel I often don't hear being pointed out, and that is the qualifiers. When this list was first released, it was a second draft of this list that came out, that these qualifiers like fresh cut and fresh and frozen, or the cheese qualified made from unpasteurized milk, when those qualifiers came out. And I think that those are really important for food businesses to be taking into consideration. So why are those qualifiers there? The regulation does have some exemptions for certain types of food. And you could have a food product, say tomatoes, that is on this list. But if you have canned tomatoes going through your facility or through your business, those wouldn't necessarily those wouldn't need to conform to this rule, because the canning has brought the tomatoes through a kill step. The kill step has a very extensive definition from the FDA that I encourage everybody to make sure that they research and look at. Effectively, it can vary from product to product, but a kill step is some step that happens over the course of that food product's life that kills off harmful bacteria. It is often cooking of a food up to a certain temperature for a certain period of time. Frozen foods are off of this list for similar reasons. The other thing that I would encourage anybody who handles any cheese products, the FDA has extensive resources and detail on cheese. There are different rules of what types of cheese would qualify or be exempt from this list based off of series of things. I would encourage you to not just infer that you think your cheese is implicated or exempt from this rule, I would really look into the FDA resources that provide the detail on the cheeses that are exempt or not. There are very specific rules, and forgive me, I'm not a cheese expert myself, but specific rules around the way that cheese is produced, products that are put into the cheese, moisture content, this sort of thing. So there might be some deep diving that you might need to do even into your own product to understand it to the degree to understand if it will sit on this FTL list or not. The other thing that I think would be really helpful for me to point out for everybody here is that any food that is made up of the combination of the foods on this list is also implicated in this rule. In any food that has any of these, even if the sum of the elements of the food is not on this list, if even partial elements of an end food product is on this list, then that would be implicated in this rule as well. So think about maybe some sort of cheese that has herbs in it. And maybe that cheese itself is not on this list, but the fresh herbs themselves are. So now that final food product is actually implicated in this. Thank you. Let's move forward. So this is a little bit of a fuzzy image here, and I apologize for that, but I wanted to give you a diagram directly from the FDA itself. If you can read through the fuzziness, this is actually a master traceback diagram that the FDA created after a E. coli outbreak in romaine lettuce. What I think is really interesting and important and helpful for people who aren't traceability experts to understand the why of this FSMA 204 rule is that on the right-hand side of your screens, that is the farm. So those multitude, that solid bar, the multitude of all of those little inputs there, those are all different farms. And you can see that their products, if you move from right to left, the product started at the farm and it flows through the supply chain all the way to point of sale and on the very left side of your screen. When there was an E. coli lettuce or an E. coli outbreak with romaine lettuce, it was up to the FDA agents to start on the left side of that screen and trace it back all the way to those farms. These outbreaks took months of traceback and research for the FDA agents to put together. And you can see, if you read the screen from right to left, from the farm to the point of sale, how often products from different farms are mixed up. And then they're mixed again. And then they're mixed again. And then maybe a batch is split up. And then it's mixed again. This is why more granular traceability is so important, and why coming up with a common language around traceability is so important, because it is virtually impossible without taking a huge percentage of a food business's products completely out of a supply chain, which could have disastrous economic impact for those businesses, to be able to really zero in on exactly where the point of contamination is. That is one of the major reasons, the major reason why FSMA 204 is here, in order for us to improve these traceability practices so that instead of it being 8-9 months for the FDA agents to get to this stage, it can be a few weeks. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'm going to give you all a break from my voice. I'm going to tap in my colleague Erik here to take you through more of a deep dive into critical tracking events and key data elements.
Great. Thank you, Natalie. And thanks everyone for having me here today. I'm honored to be able to present to this group. Starting off with CTEs and KDEs. The CTEs are what is called the critical tracking events. So those are the processes that are occurring, like receiving, shipping, transformations, etc. And the key data elements, the KDEs, is the data or attributes associated with each CTE. So in the slides ahead, we'll talk a little bit about what KDEs are required for each CTE. I'll try to keep that straight, but let's advance to the next slide. So the critical tracking events. So critical tracking events directly from the FDA says an event in the supply chain of a food involving the harvesting, cooling before the initial packing of a raw agricultural commodity other than food obtained from a fishing vessel. If it's a fishing vessel, the first land-based receiving of a food obtained from a fishing vessel, shipping, receiving, or transformation of the food. As I said, we'll have a couple of slides here showing all the different tracking events, the critical tracking events, and what information is needed to track in each of those events. Next slide, please. So here we go. So across this slide, from left to right, we've got different participants in the supply chain. And under that, it will show which critical tracking events are needed to be tracked and collected. So from the farming standpoint, at the start of the chain, you've got to have a map of where your items are grown. As a harvester, you'll be responsible for keeping track of harvesting KDEs, or key data elements, and then you'll pass those forward into the chain, the cooling KDEs, and then initial packing. This is where the FSMA 204 rule starts. So this is where the traceability lot code is also formed. So you'll have to keep track of the traceability lot code, how it was created. It's up to the initial packer to create that code. There's some loose guidance on creating the code, but no strict guidance on that, other than you want to make sure it's something that can be set that provides enough focus so it limits the scope of a recall, of course. So for the packer, you've got the initial packing KDEs, and then the shipping KDEs have to be passed on down the chain. So if it goes next to a broker, perhaps, they'll have to ingest that information from the packer, typically through electronic communications, or possibly even through labels on the case units. So the broker would have receiving KDEs, which is what they've received from the packer. And then when they turn around and ship it out, they will have the shipping KDEs, which they'll pass that along to the next step, which is the supplier, processor, co-packer, typically. And then they have to have the receiving KDEs from the prior step, the broker. And they'll need to be able to provide shipping, key data elements, as well as any transformations they do, any repack jobs, any opportunities where the food is transformed or repacked into some other unit, that those transformation KDEs, that's considered a critical tracking event. Those KDEs need to be passed on down the chain to the next link, which would be most likely the distributors. They would then be responsible for the receiving KDEs from the immediate prior step, which is the supplier, processor, co-packer. And then they have to keep track of their shipping KDEs and push that forward and communicate that basically to either the retail grocer or restaurant that they're selling the information to. And that part of the chain is responsible just for the receiving KDEs. So basically, what the FDA wants everyone to be responsible for and keep track of is the appropriate KDE information for each CTE from the prior step in the chain, from where they got it from, and then where you push it forward down to the next link of the chain, the next stop. And then what the FDA will do in the event of an investigation or recall is they'll go through and collect all the data themselves from each link in the supply chain here. So here you see what, eight or so different organizations here. So the FDA would reach out to all 8 of those to get all that information on what's called an electronic sortable spreadsheet format, which we'll get into in a few slides down the road here. But they will then take all that data, and part of the reason why they want it in a sortable spreadsheet is so they can do some, I guess you can call it data mining, and try to paint the picture from their perspective on what happened with the product. Go ahead and hit the next slide. Okay, so this shows you here how the flow of information needs to happen. A large part of the FSMA 204 rule is just basically the carrying of the data from one participant in the chain to the next, and its consistency and the ability for the FDA to efficiently, as Natalie said, efficiently conduct these investigations. So a lot of what this FSMA 204 rule is extended data that they want to have to be able to do this processing. Again, just another illustration here on the data movement. You've got the shipping from the first step there under processing. They have receiving, transformations, and then shipping, and then that needs to be passed on to the distribution. The distribution needs to be responsible for the receiving, and then the shipping, and then that gets passed on to retail, whether it be stores or restaurants or whatever.
Erik, if you don't mind just stepping in here just one moment, just because I noted one question that came up in the Q&A while you've been chatting here. This applies, there was a question about what will be the distributor's responsibility in crossdock situations. So responsibility remains the same. They still need, even if they're cross-docking, they'll need to be able to track that receiving and shipping information. Erik will go into a little bit more of that for data, but the lucky thing for distributors is that they aren't doing anything to change that product in most scenarios. So they're receiving KDEs, but we're trying to point out with this slide are the shipping KDEs. So they're getting all of the data that they're responsible for collecting from their from that processing facility, insofar as this this outline or this image lays out. Dates and times may be adjusted for the shipping, but it would effectively be the same information that flows through that organization during this critical tracking event. And again, so those KDEs become their shipping KDEs, which in turn, those are the receiving KDEs for the next business down the supply chain. So it won't necessarily mean that every business is having to create all of this brand new data at every step. Some businesses, it really just will be a flow through of the data through their organization.
Yeah, great clarification, Natalie. And that was an excellent question on the crossdock that was asked. So basically, communicating this information, most people right now are planning to communicate this information through an EDI, data transmission on the ASN document. So basically what it is, it'll be a few more fields added to that ASN document. Easier said than done, I know, because a lot of the information that those couple of extra fields that need to be added to that ASN are going to require quite an operational lift from people in the supply chain. Also, in addition to electronically communicating this information, you could also add it to the case labeling. Make sure the traceability lot code's on there and some extended attributes that are added to the case labels. Although the experience we've seen so far talking with retailers and restaurants so far is they want to stay as far away from scanning as possible. As you can imagine, that's a huge operational lift that they aren't all doing right now to the degree they need to be doing it for FSMA 204 compliance. The preferred method is certainly electronic communication, but they recognize that they'll have to audit that occasionally as well to ensure that the electronically communicated information is accurate. And that's part of the due diligence process that the FDA does expect. I don't know if you've covered that one yet or not, Natalie. I know the slide's in here, but yeah, is in the deck here, but it's definitely something that needs to be done. So the next slide, key data elements, these are essentially what that says. These are all the data elements or fields of data for each critical tracking event. So you've got the quote there right from the FDA, but that's essentially what that is. We can go to the next slide here. Traceability lot code. Okay, this is the real important one here. This is the essential. This is the key to linking all the different parts of the supply chain together from all these data sets. When the FDA requests these electronic sortable spreadsheets, the traceability lot code is the common linkage that needs to be passed on down through the chain. So they're able to link all these records together from the different entities and organizations that they request information from. What is the traceability lot code? It's a descriptor, as it says here, alphanumeric, used to uniquely identify a traceability lot within the records of the firm that assigned the traceability lot code. And usually this is the initial packer. And a lot of times what can be used is the GTIN, the Global Trade Identification Number, which basically gives the company and the product information. And then in addition to that, the batch and lot code. And that is basically what is requested to put together the traceability lot code, and probably the most effective way in order to minimize the impact of a recall. So in addition to this, a traceability lot code source needs to be documented as well. So you need to have the traceability lot code that was assigned by the original packer, but also the traceability lot code source needs to be in the electronic spreadsheet as well. And typically what this is, this could even be a link to a website of the company that created the traceability lot code. There just needs to be some sort of linkage as to an identification as to who set this traceability lot code so that the FDA is aware of who created that. Okay, we can go to the next slide. All right, this slide here shows on the ship and receive CTEs, critical transformation events, critical tracking events, sorry, for both shipping and receiving CTEs, we're looking at probably about 8 total KDEs per ship and per receive event. 6 of them are already commonly found on bill of ladings and EDI messages, so that's good. The 2 that are not there typically today and are new for the industry is the traceability lot code that we just discussed, along with the traceability lot code source or reference. So that's indicated there below. I just discussed the lot code itself and then the lot code source as well. Those extra 2 are going to be, for some, the heavy lift to get in there, and some may not be that hard to get put on there. Next slide, please. Okay, transformation. So with the transformation tracking events, there's 9 KDEs required for that. 7 are commonly found on work orders and EDI messages, and 2 need to be added. Again, for the transformation, KDEs for the food traceability list, food used as ingredients, the traceability lot code for the food, that's a new one, the product description, and then number 3, the for each traceability lot, use the quantity and unit of measure. a lot of that stuff we're already communicating in the industry. And then the next section down, the transformation KDEs for new food produced, item number 4, or KDE number 4, is the traceability lot code for the food. 5 is the location description, where the food was transformed. So that could be the traceability lot code source reference. And then the date is number 6. Number 7, product description for the food. 8, the quantity and unit of measure. And 9, the reference document type. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, key data elements. So here's a little bit more of a breakdown of each of the KDEs and some notes or examples as well as an example of KDEs. The first one here, we've got the traceability lot code for the food you received. And the notes on that, you've got that a lot on the case labels right now is the G10 and then the lot. And then the KDE would show an example here, would show the 01 and then the G10 number, and then the lot there indicating ABC 1, 2, 3. Quantity and unit measure, product description, and then lastly, the location description for the immediate previous source of the food. So that was a ship from location. So the previous step in the chain. You can go to the next slide. Let's see here. So the receiving key data elements, a location from where the food was received, so where it came from, ship to location, KDE, the received date, obviously the date, month, day, and year format, location description, traceability lot code source or method for looking up the source. So in this example, Ed's Salad Processing Company. Reference, document type and number. So that's typically a purchase order and invoice. And then user ID and entry date is also in there. Next slide, please. Okay. And then all that information needs to be delivered to FDA on an electronic sortable spreadsheet format. The FDA does not have a strict or tight requirement for what the sheet should look like, nor do they really have a template. But basically, it's all of these KDEs and what we're seeing and what we're recommending, if you could all imagine this, is imagine a Microsoft Excel workbook that has several worksheets in it. And starting from the left to right, if you're a packer, for instance, you want to, on the left, you can have a receiving tab and then have all the KDEs for that particular CTE listed there. And then the next worksheet tab could be maybe a transformation. And then the transformation information, and then maybe a third tab on that spreadsheet could be the shipping information and all the KDEs around that. So this screenshot here is not what you must have. This is just an example of a system that is getting ready to generate an electronic sortable spreadsheet. So you can see here that product information was put in by the user, start date and an end date, hit submit, and then it shows here in this particular software a receiving tab, farm activities, shipping transformation, product details and location details, and then you can go ahead and hit export, and then it would generate that spreadsheet for you. So there are software applications on the market today that keep track of all this information throughout the whole supply chain, and every link in the supply chain contributes to it. And then it can be generated through this cloud software as a electronically sortable spreadsheet, whether it be an Excel format, a CSV format, or just a regular text format. So again, the FDA doesn't have a specific format they want or a template. They just are telling us that we need these KDEs for each CTE in some sort of electronic spreadsheet that they can do sorting on. And that's basically the guidance and what they want. Everything else is pretty much up to you. Next slide, please. All right. I guess that concludes my part here, Natalie. If you want to take over
Get
again.
back up for a little while. There are some really excellent questions happening in the Q&A. I have gone through and tried to address a few of them. Some of them I know that we will be getting to the information, and some of them I think may be good launching points for larger conversations during our Q&A time. Let's see if we can get through the rest of these slides, and then we can open this up to our discussion. So there was a question about this in the Q&A about exemptions for smaller farms, retailers, and restaurants. There are specifics about this actually written in the rule, all taxation clauses sorts of things, but effectively if you were a business operating with less than 250K annual revenue, then you would be exempt from this rule. Again, I would look at the very specific language that the FDA has laid out around this to confirm if you are in fact exempt or not. What I would say though is that even if there is an exemption for you, there may be an expectation on the part of your supply chain partners that you share certain elements of this data with them. So it is really good for you to be well versed in the rule either way. There are a series of exemptions. I've only listed a few here. There's another one for any of you who may be working with bivalves or mollusks. If you are currently under the National Shellfish Sanitation Program, there's exemptions for you effectively because you're already having to do a lot of this. And there are exemptions for any food that is not currently listed on the FDL or who have gone through a kill step. So do make sure that you are reviewing the food that you are producing to see if it qualifies as falling under a kill step. And just be aware that that FDL list could change or will likely change every 5 years. Next slide, please. Due diligence. It ties into something that I was just saying with the exemptions. Under this rule, it is your responsibility for not only ensuring that you are capturing the information that you receive or capturing the information that you're supposed to under that receive event and sending out the information that you're supposed to and capturing the information if you're involved in any sort of transformation or initial packing or cooling event. But it's also your responsibility to make sure that you are receiving the correct information. So there is a due diligence aspect here for all members of the supply chain. There has been a conversation about accuracy of data coming up in the Q&A. To be frank, data accuracy is traceability's biggest challenge. There is a saying that us in the traceability world talk about, and it's the garbage in, garbage out problem. If you're not getting good data in, if you're not getting authentic data in, then you're not able to send authentic data out. There's a due diligence element to this rule when you actually look at it, because it is your responsibility to ensure that you're receiving all of the information that you're supposed to be receiving. And of course, all of us only want to work with trusted supply chain partners because none of us want our businesses to be at risk because of a bad apple at some other point in our supply chain. So again, I'm saying this multiple times, but traceability is a team sport. This rule really requires all businesses and food supply chains to start conversations with their supply chain partners about the rule and about how everybody is going to work together to ensure compliance. Next slide, please. Okay, so into the more proactive section of our presentation. We'll just move forward, please, Alexis. Let's talk about how we can get prepared. So I think that you are all doing the absolute right thing by attending webinars with experts on traceability and on the rule like this one. Take in as much of this content as you can. FDA has really a pretty good, as far as government websites go, it's a pretty good amount of resources right now, actually about the rule that I really encourage, especially if it is your responsibility for the food business that you work for. I really encourage you to try to just read the rule. Their FAQ tool is really helpful. I use it almost every day. But I would also really encourage you, on top of these sorts of webinars, there are a number of other resources out there that are a little bit more comprehensible. GS1 US has created a guideline. The Institute of Food Technologists Global Food Traceability Center has a lot of really great resources. PTI has great resources. The NRA produced a guideline. The National Fisheries Institute produced a guide for those businesses that are handling any sort of seafood. Lots of these organizations have detailed in more common language what this rule actually means. So I really encourage you to get Googling, look at these reputable resources and do that research. Next slide, please. We'd really encourage you to conduct a gap analysis. I think that this is the best place for everybody to go after that first research step. We at New Era Partners do this for our clients, conducting gap analysis. So what you want to do is you want to do an assessment of the processes that you have in place, both written protocols. How much do you have already written that could conform or could be pulled over into a traceability plan? But you also want to look at actually what's happening on the floor, practically, operationally in your businesses. You want to make sure you're having those conversations with your supply chain partners, making sure that they have the same comprehension about this rule and that you're all on the same page about your expectations for how you're going to send and receive information. And also, if you're using any sort of technology system, whether we're talking something as rudimentary as your Excel spreadsheets that you have set up, or if you have ERP systems, WMS systems, so warehouse management software, enterprise resource planning software, if you're using some sort of CRM, if you're using an inventory management software, even things like software for accounting, your QuickBooks, something like that. Do a gap analysis of the technology that you are using in your businesses right now and compare what data are we collecting versus what does this role require. Do that gap analysis. It's so important. We can tell you from experience, it is more common than not. I would say about 95% of the time, businesses assume that they have more information or that they have access to more information than they actually do. So it's very important. You don't want to find out that you're coming up short and that you're not able to get information when an FDA auditor is asking you for it. You want to make sure that you have that in advance. Next slide, please. When you are going through this internal assessment, wanted to provide you with a few questions. I'm assuming that these slides will be available. This presentation should be available on YouTube, but go ahead and screenshot them if you want. These are questions that I hope will be able to serve as a launching point for that assessment and your internal and your supply chain partner investigations when you're trying to prepare yourselves for compliance to this rule. So let's go through them and then we can have a larger discussion during the Q&A session about these. But you want to first ask yourself, what foods on that FTL list will your business be responsible for reporting on? I think a good extension question to this would be having those internal discussions with your organization on, do you want to limit your traceability procedures to just the foods on the FTL, or if you would like to just apply those procedures and requirements to all of the foods that you're handling. What critical tracking events defined in the rule does your business execute? So again, this is the FDA trying to create a common framework and a standardized language for how we talk about food supply chains. What roles do you play? You could just play one role. Your business could play multiple roles. But you need to make sure that you're clear on exactly what those critical tracking events are that your business executes, because that is the key to telling you what data you need to be collecting. Next, is your business currently capturing the relevant KDEs required by the rule? So when you're doing this gap analysis, when you're doing this assessment, you're looking at your processes, you're looking at your bills of lading and your invoicing processes, when you're looking at the technology in place, where are you capturing all of those data elements Are you capturing all of the data elements required by the rule? And I think going back to that, where are you capturing them? We have come across businesses who are capturing the majority of them in some form or another. But maybe some of them are in the inventory management system and some of them are on this Excel spreadsheet. Well, that is one of those gap analysis, or that's one of those things that the gap analysis will reveal to you, because it will be your business's responsibility for ensuring that you can get all of that information into one electronic sortable spreadsheet for an FDA agent. Excuse me. Next question. What systems does your business use to collect and store those KDEs? So this goes back again, part of this gap analysis. These are questions to help guide you through that. What software are in place? What paper trail systems are in place? And what processes you have documented that the expectation is that everybody at your business are following in order to collect those KDEs. Of course, the extension to questions like this are, what do you need to do to change if there are gaps? Next slide, please. A few more questions here. How is data shared between you and your suppliers and between you and your customers? Excuse me. So this is pointing to those receive and ship critical tracking events. So we need to be clear on how you're getting the data that it is your responsibility to capture from your suppliers, and how you are sending out the data that it is your responsibility to be sending to your buyers. And again, this is one of those places that will serve, or one of those questions that will serve as a launching point for you to determine what conversations do I need to be having with these suppliers to make sure that our expectations are all level set for how this is going to work and how data will flow across us. Do you have a way to store the information electronically? Now, the answer to this may be no, and that could be okay, again, depending on the scale and complexity of your business. At New Era Partners, we recommend utilizing some sort of technology solution. We think that's just a more effective and efficient way of being able to store this necessary data, especially since those FDA agents are going to want an electronic sortable spreadsheet. Next question. Are you able to produce that electronic sortable spreadsheet in 24 hours? That should be a pretty quick answer for everybody. You should probably know that at this point. If you don't know that, try it. Do a mock audit and see if you are able to produce that for food items that are on that FDL, or maybe just choose one of the food items that you manage on the FDL. Are you able to produce that electronic sortable spreadsheet? What do you need to go through in order to do that? How difficult or how easy was it? Again, question 8, pointing to those important conversations for you to have with the businesses in your supply chain. Are they aware of their FSMA 204 compliance requirements? Some businesses are just learning about FSMA 204 right now. So really important for you to have those conversations and make sure that everybody in your supply chain is very aware and that you're able to capture the information that you're responsible for from them. And absolutely, if the business decision has been made to only conform to this rule for the food items on the FDL, let's make sure you get very clear on what food items are exempt and that you are positive that those food items are exempt, because again, you don't want to get caught without the information when you need it. Next slide, please. What we would recommend also is to draft, budget, and test. So start drafting that traceability plan and socializing it within your organization and with your supply chain partners. I think that actually putting pen to paper is one of those great activities that actually helps you understand what you know and what you don't know, or what things actually need to be changed. Again, more often than not, our experience in providing consulting services to food businesses is that often businesses think that we pass our HACCP audit every year, so we're going to be fine. Not necessarily. You might not have all of the details and the requirements that are written in this rule. So actually putting pen to paper or starting to type that out is really helpful. So start drafting that traceability plan. Highly encourage you to get that going sooner rather than later. If you are making a decision to invest in some technology in order to make conforming to this rule, complying with this rule rather, effective for you, start talking about those budgets. This technology, you will want to have it in place, tried, in place, tested, staff trained on it, So everybody knows how to use it before January 26th. So you've got to make sure that you have that investment budgeted and that you're starting to get going on that. We highly encourage businesses that are going to be investing in technology to make sure that they're getting that technology in place in 2025 so that you can be testing it and so that it is habituated into all staff members' ways of working before January of 26. And I did briefly note this, but we highly encourage you taking that draft traceability plan and conduct a mock audit internally. Take one of those FTL food items and see if you can produce that electronic sortable spreadsheet. It will really help you understand where work needs to be done in order to ensure compliance in your organization. Next slide. Finally, traceability is a team sport. You've heard me say it so many times over the course of this. You're probably quite sick of it, but I can't emphasize this enough. Traceability systems are only as good as the data that is put in them. So ensuring that you're having those talks with your supply chain partners and that your supply chain partners are clear on what their requirements are and what your expectations are is so important in order for this to be effective. Again, I think that there is a huge amount of opportunity here outside of just seeing this as an FDA administrative burden. Traceability has the power and the potential to help you understand your business more. In implementing traceability software solutions in large processing facilities in the past, deeper insights into yields and into trends and into worker effectiveness and all of these sorts of things. You can take this data that the FDA is, yes, it's requiring it, but you can take this data and you can put it to work and really get a positive ROI on that for your business. So I highly encourage you to try to view this with slightly more rose-colored glasses and say, okay, I've got to do this. How can I make this work for me and for my business? See it as an opportunity to gain more insights and improve the way that you do business. Next slide, please. I think that is it. Alexis, pass it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Natalie and Erik. I see you both got your cameras on already. Great. Quick reminder to anyone who has not put their question in the chat, please feel free, go ahead, put those in the Q&A box. If we run out of time, just as a quick reminder, I know there's lots of questions that others might have. We are going to collect all of them, anything that we haven't gotten a chance to answer, and we are going to put them together in that remaining questions document and give Natalie and Erik an opportunity to answer those questions right alongside that key takeaway document. Okay, let's start with, but we are out of time. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Natalie and Erik, for coming on, for answering all of our questions. We've got a list, of course, of more to go. So I'll go ahead, I'll pull those and I'll share those with you both after the webinar today, and we'll include that in the key takeaways. Anyone who's attending, please feel free to watch this recording over and over, review the key takeaways and those remaining questions documents, and we'll see you next month at the next produce safety webinar in the series.
It was such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.